I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sandy Junek from Molecular Lab Manager and part owner of the Discovery Seed Lab Limited. And he will be discussing root rot tools and how to use them to make decisions. Sandy has held roles as research technician at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, private biotech companies, and the Saskatchewan Cancer Agency in 2010. Sandy joined Discovery Labs to set up their molecular laboratory and went on to become part owner.
Good morning, everybody. Like they said, my name's Sandy. I'm the molecular lab manager at Discovery Seed Labs in Saskatoon. And today we're going to talk about root rot testing and how it can help you make some decisions regarding your farm. So the first question would be, why would you want to test? Basically, it provides answers to what is happening in your field. If you see some damage happening, you're not sure what it could be, we can run a test on those plants, kind of tell you what's going on. That'll confirm whether the damage or anything that you're seeing in your field is actually attributed to a root rot pathogen. It'll also tell you which pathogen is causing the damage. And depending on which pathogen it is, that'll allow you to make future decisions around rotations for that particular field. This is primarily in regarding to the presence of Aphanomyces in the field or Fusarium species. So a little bit how the testing is done. So we have tests available for both soil samples as well as tissue samples. The tissue tests are kind of done to confirm the presence of a pathogen in a sample during the growing season. So this would be when you're already seeing a problem or some damage in the field and you want to confirm what's happening with those plants, we can test the tissue. So the root tissue from any suspect plants is submitted to the laboratory. We do a DNA extraction from it. And then we use pathogen-specific molecular markers to determine what is actually in that plant and then what's causing the damage. For soil testing, this is kind of something that you would do pre-seeding. Usually people will survey fields that they're thinking about putting a pulse on the fall previous to planting. So we can take a soil sample from that field, submit it to the laboratory. For our Aphanomyces testing, what we do is we call it a bait test. So we actually take week-old pea seedlings, we plant them in that soil that's submitted to the lab. We keep them under ideal disease development conditions for 7 days. At the end of the 7-day time period, we take those roots out of the soil, we extract DNA from those roots, and then we run our molecular analysis on that to determine whether it's been infected with the pathogen during that time. So the results, what do they tell you? Basically, a tissue test will let you know what's causing the damage in your field currently. And it lets you know then as well what pathogens are present in that soil. So if you're sending in some tissue samples from some fields where you're seeing some yellowing off and things like that, it comes back saying negative for Aphanomyces. We'll run our Fusarium marker set on there. Typically, it'll be positive for that. So you know then the damage is caused by Fusarium in that field, lets you know how to manage that disease. If it's present, if it's positive for the Aphanomyces, you know that's what's causing the damage in that field. And it also lets you know that Aphanomyces is present in that soil. So from a rotation aspect, you probably want to take that field out of pulses for a number of years. And then our soil tests, they're kind of a little more proactive. So they let you know which pathogens are present in that sample and if they're capable of causing an infection. The results, depending on whether they're positive or negative, will let you know whether that's a good field to go in with the pulse crop that year, or whether you should skip it, leave it out of rotation for another year. That was interesting. And then the soil test can be used year on year to monitor the disease pressure in that field, so we can get a sense of the spore load in the soil, and kind of monitor that year on year, see that it's dropping off to let you know when it's safer to go back in and put a pulse crop onto that field. So for submitting samples, tissue samples, it's pretty simple. You go to the field where you're seeing any kind of damage, anything like that, any areas that don't look right, dig up a few of the plants, submit the roots in a plastic bag, and send them to the lab. It's pretty simple procedure. Soil samples, you can collect them from any fields that you're interested in putting a pulse on, or say you've acquired some new land or something like that, you don't know the rotation history or things like that. You can do soil testing on there to determine whether a Phanomyces is present on that field. If it's a field you're not super familiar with or one that's been out of pulses for a while, we suggest collecting soil samples from the areas of concern, so the areas with the highest chance of finding the pathogen where they're going to hang out. So that low spots, water runs, and if it's relatively flat land, you don't have those. The compacted headlands are also a good spot to survey for the presence of the disease in the soil. You want to collect your soil sample from about 4 to 9 inch depth range, kind of depending on the soil profile of that particular field, and just avoid submitting any topsoil due to the low pathogen level. It exists kind of at root depth. And what we're working on now, we're working on a direct soil DNA extraction method that would allow us to better quantify the pathogen level in the soil. Everybody wants a number, a spore load, let's say. It's pretty tricky with the Phanomyces. It can exist in the soil at extremely low levels and still cause damage. The soil is a pretty complex medium to work with as far as, getting all of the complete DNA out. So we're always working on getting a better soil DNA extraction method that will allow us to provide you a number. We don't typically do that just right off the hop because there isn't a lot of information of what that number means. It's not like other pathogens where it's been well established for management practices and yield loss risk and things like that. So giving a number sometimes can provide a bit of a false hope to people. If I told you only had 100 spores per gram of Phanomyces in your soil, you'd probably be pretty. It sounds happy, but that's a level that if you put a pulse crop in there and you have the proper weather conditions, you're going to see a pretty significant infection even at that level and suffer the yield loss. We're also working with our bait test to kind of correlate the infection that we see after a week to a spore load in a soil, and trying to convert that back to a risk factor, high, medium, low risk for planting pulses in that field. Right now, the results are just a detected, not detected. But we can delve a little bit more into the analysis if you have 2 fields and things like that. We can always do a little more analysis to help you pick which field. If you have to put a pulse between 2 that Phanomyces is both present, I can typically tell which one would be a higher risk field. That's just a call into the lab to talk to myself. And then we're always working on developing any new assays, tests any emerging pathogens, anything like that, that are of concern for growers. So if you've seen something on your farm that you're not quite sure what's going on, you can always give us a call. It's always fun to look at new things. If it's not the traditional pathogens that are causing it, we can kind of do some more work and kind of figure out what's going on. That's all that I had for you guys today. Are there any questions? Thanks. So the question was if we can test any crop that's showing damage this year for determine whether the damage is being caused by the residual herbicide in the soil. And unfortunately, we can't do that testing. Absolutely. So the question was, when's the best time to do this testing? The answer is this test can be actually done at any time of the year. As long as you can get to the soil, we can run the test. It does take about a week to do, so that would be the only thing is to give yourself enough time. Typically, most people will survey their prospective fields that they want to put pulses on. They'll do that in the fall. After harvest of the previous crop, they'll go in and do their soil samples. and we can detect it, and then they'll know the next spring whether they can go right in there. But we can also do it in the spring. We realize that's a little bit late if you've already kind of made some decisions. But if there is something that you're concerned about, or if they think you could switch between one field and another fairly easy as far as seeding, we can still actually do this test in the spring. And the tissue sampling can be done anytime that there's a crop present in the field. So the question was, is the test just detected, not detected, or can it also determine the levels in the soil? So right now we have it set up that it's a detected, not detected test. But we can go a little bit more into it and get more information for the producer or the grower about the infection level that's there without actually going into a full quantitative test. We do have the capability of doing quantification. It's just a test whether what we're creating in the lab to create our curves and everything is accurate to a field level. That's where we're still kind of struggling. But if a producer wants to know, is there higher disease in field A or field B, we can definitely provide that information for them. So the question was, we also test for fusarium as well as Aphanomyces. And yeah, we do have molecular markers for fusarium. We'll typically run those on plant samples that people bring in when they end up being negative for the presence of Aphanomyces. We can confirm that it is a fusarium infection in the field. We don't typically run the fusarium markers on soil samples themselves because there's 30 some species of fusarium and they're kind of always present in the soil. So it's always gonna sort of kick up and tell us that it's positive. If there was a specific subspecies of fusarium that people were interested in knowing whether it's present in the soil, we do have specific molecular markers for a number of the species that we can run and get an answer that way. That's pretty difficult. A lot of it depends on how heavily infected that field was the first time that you saw damage. We have done some tests on fields that have been out of pulses for that 6 to 8 year range, and we're still finding Aphanomyces in that soil that's capable of infecting those plants. So it definitely seems like once it's there, you probably want to plan on it on at least a 6 to 8 year break from pulses, unfortunately.
I would really like to thank Sandy for the informative presentation.
Great, thank you very much.